This meeting to order. This is the Tuesday, January 25th meeting of the House Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications Committee. I want to thank everyone for being here this morning. How many do we have, committee members do we have on WebEx? 7. And Mark, so we got 2 more. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's on. I can hear me. So, okay. So we should have 9, which is what we need for a quorum. First item of business is approval of minutes from the January 11th, 13th, 18th, and 20th meeting. Is there a motion concerning these minutes? Representative Delperdang, is that a motion to approve?
I'd like to motion to approve them.
I see a second from Representative O'Hobbison. Is there any discussion on the motion? Second? Anyone raising their hands on WebEx? Okay. All in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. I believe the motion carries. The minutes are approved. Are there bill introductions from any member of the committee? Anyone on WebEx raising their hand? Okay. Are there any bill introductions from the gallery? John Bottenberg, you have a bill introduction? No? All right. Just a quick reminder, as you see on the agenda, February 3rd is the last day to request bills here in committee. So want to keep that in mind. Technically the deadline is the Monday after, but that will be our last meeting before. So if you want to request a bill introduction, we're closing in on that date pretty rapidly. So, all right. It's telecom and phone and cable day, and I have some fun. So we got a lot of presentations this morning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've got about an hour and a half. If you see me doing this, presenters, that means your time is drawing to an end. Find the conclusion, pull the ripcord, fall out the exit, whatever you need to do to start wrapping it up. Please, we want to leave time for committee questions for you about your industry. And if you use acronyms, explain the first time you use it. Give us the whole spiel so we know what you're talking about. This is one of those jargon-related fields, and we want to make sure everybody who's listening at home and everybody who's on the committee has a good grounding in what you're talking about. See, a little grounding, a little joke. Okay, a couple you got it. I know it's not electricity day, but we can still use utilities humor in here. All right, let's start with Catherine Moyer, President and General Manager of Pioneer Communications. Catherine, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I am Catherine Moyer. I'm not the president. I'm the CEO of Pioneer Communications. It's fine. I got upgraded. I'm headquartered in Ulysses, Kansas, so out in the southwest corner of the state. I appreciate the invitation to appear before you all today. I will tell you I'm here on behalf of the Rural Local Exchange Carriers, the RLECs. So it's the small independent phone companies that serve really the rural, sparsely populated parts of Kansas. There's 34 of us. We're represented by the Communications Coalition of Kansas, to make it easy, CCK. Mary Jane and Gavin and Carrie and several others represent us here under the dome. We're really the phone providers and the internet providers, again, the really sparsely rural populated parts of Kansas. We serve 104 of the 105 counties in the state of Kansas, Wyandotte County being the exception. We serve more than 50% of the geographic area of Kansas, but only about 15% of the households. So again, rural, sparsely populated. I'm going to talk a little bit about, we have 2 different really service territories that we talk about. We talk about our certificated areas where we have regulatory requirements to serve. And then we have other areas outside of that where we don't have regulatory requirements to serve. I'm going to talk a little bit about that part of Pioneer Communications in Southwest Kansas. We have 5,000 square miles, 2 customers per square mile. But if you take into the fact that 81% of our folks in Southwest Kansas reside in what I will call our population centers, Ulysses, Lakin, but also things like Big Bow, Kendall, the really small communities that we have in Southwest Kansas, it drops down the rural part, the other part of our service territory, to less than one half of a subscriber per square mile. So again, not a lot of people. 81% of our subscribers reside in 15 square miles of those 5,000 square miles. So the remaining 19% reside in the 4,985 square miles. So again, making the point that it's rural and sparsely populated. Those 81% of our subscribers utilize about 14% of our network, while the other 19% utilize 86% of our route miles. So again, there's a huge number of customers. Well, not a huge number of customers. There's a huge number of route miles that are utilized by a very small number of our customers. The cost to serve those areas is pretty expensive. It's much more expensive to serve those sparsely populated areas than it is to serve the urban parts of Kansas. As part of our regulatory requirements, we are a carrier of last resort, meaning that if there is someone in that service territory that wants voice service, we have to serve them. Regardless of what the economic impact of it is to the company, we have to serve them. Basically, the idea was if they made a carrier of last resort obligation, then people would receive service in areas where competition didn't guarantee that service would be provided. There is a common misconception, I think, that landline phones have just dropped off the face of the earth and aren't utilized any longer. What I will tell you in our service territories, yes, we did see some initial drops, but frankly, there are still a lot of people that have landline telephones. Shocking as that might be, but there are still parts in the state of Kansas, and I can tell you where they are, and at least in our service territory, where you can't get a cell signal, or you can't get a strong enough cell signal for it to be available inside your home. So definitely, landlines are still something that people have. Additionally, let's be honest, landline phone networks still also provide broadband. So, that is obviously the topic du jour. That's what everybody wants to talk about, is getting broadband to the rural, sparsely populated parts of the U.S. As part of that regulatory requirement, we do get universal service funds from the federal government. We also get Kansas Universal Service Fund from the Kansas Fund. I'm not going to go into it. You have 400 pages of written testimony that I submitted that talk about why there is KUSF. I know that's not the topic today. I just wanted to note that we do get it. There's an explanation of why KUSF was created in your written testimony. But basically, we utilize KUSF to continue to build and maintain and upgrade the networks in rural Kansas. I will also note that KUSF is not something that is just handed to us at the start of a year and say, hey, go spend it, but rather we actually have to make an investment and then prove that investment, and then several years later, we can partially recover some of that investment from KUSF as well as from the USF on the federal side. So I just want to point out that it's not just handed to us and say, hey, like I said, go spend it. Like I mentioned, there are parts of our service territory that we serve that are not part of those highly regulated areas. There are parts of Kansas that we have found a business plan to serve. In our case, small communities like Scott City, Leota, Marienthal, Sharon Springs, where there is not a KUSF or USF component, but rather we found a business plan to be able to serve those. I will tell you, though, those are really communities that we're serving. We're not serving outside of the population center. We're not serving the vast rural swaths of the counties that surround those communities. Because again, that becomes the business plan, and how do you make it, and how do you actually serve it. And again, I think one of the big things that we talk about is how you continue to maintain it. There's a lot of information in there about upcoming grants. I think everybody is talking about it, right? Whether it's the Department of Commerce's broadband acceleration grants, or the Spark Committee that you're all familiar with using the American Recovery, the ARPA dollars, or the upcoming Infrastructure Jobs Act that was passed, gave about $42.5 billion to NTIA, which is an agency at the federal level, National Telecommunications Information Administration, and they are in turn formulating the BEAD program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, which will then block grant money to each of the states. So upcoming, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars coming into the state of Kansas, which will then be utilized for broadband deployment and broadband adoption. One of the things that I want to make my point about as I talked about those programs is when you talk about a grant program, which is really great for the initial investment, the initial capital expenditure. The other part that you need to talk about is how can we make sure that that is actually maintained going forward? Because that's the big piece, right? If you can build it, that's great. But what about 5 years from now? Do you have enough revenue coming from the customers that are actually on that network to be able to maintain that network and upgrade that network in the future? Because if you don't, those initial grant dollars are stranded. It's not, it's a pointless to spend it that way. And so we talk a lot about it, the carriers in the state of Kansas talk about those Kansas carriers that have been here and invested in the state are those carriers that are going to be here for the long haul. They're the ones that are going to make the investment, the long-term investment, and get the recovery back from those customers. And so I want to make the point that it's not just the initial capital expenditure, but it's the cost to maintain the network and ultimately upgrade it. I'm going to point out, I did put some facts and figures in the testimony that you have in front of you, but we just recently did some projects where we spent, to make it easy, $750,000 serve 32 locations. $23,500 per location. You take an average revenue per user of $100 per month, it's going to take 20 years to recover that initial investment. So my point is, you've got to be here for the long haul, but you also have to make sure that you're going to be able to service those, in our case, those 32 locations as we move forward into the 5 years, 10 years, and what from now. The other point I want to make is that scalability is so incredibly important. You know, I think some of the other presenters are going to talk about it as well, but we saw internet usage jump, the data usage jump during the pandemic. And it's not just the download speed, but it's the upload speed. So now we're really talking about symmetrical speeds. It's no longer 10-1 or 25-3, but let's talk about 25-25, 50-50, 100-100, gig, because what we're talking about is the ability to do business goes both ways. You guys have all been part of Zoom meetings that are terrible, and oftentimes it's because the upload speed on somebody's connection is not good. And so honestly, that has become something that's really important. And I put some figures in there about how much that's grown. The point of that is the scalability of the network is so incredibly important. Again, you don't want stranded investment. What you want to do is you want to build it, be able to scale it, and be able to meet the demands for something like a pandemic, but also just the amount of connected devices and the amount of data that's going to the network. So I've covered a lot of ground. Hopefully I'm still within my time, and I'd be happy to stand for questions now or at the end of the presentations, whatever's appropriate. Well, that is true. I don't disagree. Great.
I want to thank you for coming in today. Thank you for telling us a little bit about RLEX and what goes on in the rural areas of the state. It is important. We have a lot of members from a lot of areas on our committee, but many of them are from urban areas, and so might not have been exposed to that before. And the challenges that you specifically face when you've got 2 customers per mile, trying to figure out how you're going to make that new line pencil out. So thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Next up, Pat Fusic, Director of State Government Affairs, T-Mobile.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. It's been a little while since we've been here, since we weren't allowed to travel with the pandemic, so it's nice to be back and see a lot of great new faces. And first off, this is not Texas Tech. I am, changed colors from yellow to magenta, as we like to call it, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you today. Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair Schreiber, you're not sure who's online or not, so I'm going to do my due diligence, and Ranking Member Keither say thank you for the opportunity to be here. I am Patrick Fusic, Director of Government Affairs with T-Mobile. I about to said Sprint there, but I'm trying to get over that. So I have 9 states that I cover. When I'm not here, I'm in fun places like Des Moines and Jeff City and things like that. And when I'm not here, Sandy Braden and her team with Brader, Heidner, and Lowe as our lobbyists. So really appreciate the job that she does representing us. And I will apologize again for my voice. Sorry, still recovering from that little football game on Sunday night, which was pretty awesome. So it's great to see a lot of the faces that we've worked with in the past here, and I look forward to working with some of the new members that I haven't had an opportunity to meet on the committee, and work with you on issues that are before this committee. I was just going to go through a couple of issues that you've got my testimony, just kind of touch on a couple things there that are in the testimony, that the key issues, and then just be available for any questions. So as most of you know, T-Mobile completed our merger with Sprint in April 2020. So we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary, which is kind of hard to believe. And while the new company, the new T-Mobile, is headquartered in Bellevue, Washington, Overland Park campus, which we refer to now as HQ2, is still an intricate part of the company. We have almost 5,000 employees here in Kansas right now. So Kansas is a very big part of the new T-Mobile. The merger commitments that we made when this was approved by the FCC and DOJ was to grow the new company by 10,000 jobs in the first 3 years. And I'm happy to say that we're on pace for doing that. And specifically here in Kansas, we added 130 jobs just last year. And by the end of this year, we'll have 500 new jobs. So we're happy to see that growth. And I think I saw a stat somewhere just recently that we have like 300 job openings right now with the company. So I know its staffing is a struggle in a lot of industries, and we are no exception to that. Another benefit from the merger is a program we rolled out called Hometown Grants, which is part of a massive 5-year commitment to bring 5G to rural America. And with the acronyms, Mr. Chair, fifth generation, I think that one's probably self-explanatory just to make sure. So that program, that we're looking to hire 7,500 new employees in rural communities and support economic development in small towns by providing $25 million in funding. So through these hometown grants, we've been able to help communities across the country move forward with projects to build on the strengths that they have always had in their small towns to make them great places to work and live. Last year, specifically here in Kansas, we did 2 hometown grants. $50,000 went to Yates Center for renovating a building that is a community center and is also going to be used as a business incubator. And in Fort Scott, $50,000 to create a downtown green space with the addition of an entrance pavilion and walkway to the Market Street Pavilion. In addition to that, T-Mobile is investing in home internet. So we'll be providing, home internet. Basically, it's through a hub at the home. It's fixed wireless, so it's not a landline to the home. And that broadband service is going to be available to 10 million rural customers across the country. Again, it's part of our goal to ensure all Americans, from big cities to small towns and rural communities across the country, have access to the latest products, services, and technology. We announced the rollout of home internet in several states last year and just announced Texas last week. So it'll be coming to a state near you soon. So look forward to that. We also committed to building 600 new retail stores in small and rural towns across the country as part of our merger. And we did open 4 stores last year in Kansas alone. Those were Hayes, Garden City, El Dorado, and Dodge City. And we also have 7 planned for opening in 2022. And so we have a total of 35 T-Mobile stores, 35 Metro PCS, which is our prepaid brand. And we also have a call center down in Wichita, which has almost 800 employees when fully staffed. A lot of those folks during the pandemic had to go home, so it was really kind of a learning curve. I think a lot of industries did that with their call centers, obviously had to send folks home and do a whole new learning process to serve customers from home. So we're kind of migrating them back in as we return to work. Another program that we did as part of the merger is called Project 10 Million, and this provides free service to low-income students and enables them to access the internet from home. And we have provided almost 16,000 students in Kansas with this type of connectivity. This is especially critical over the last 2 years, with so many students having to participate in remote learning during the pandemic. Project 10 Million is a $10.7 billion investment to close the homework gap by offering this free service, hotspots, and reduce cost devices to 10 million households over 5 years. Lastly, regarding the network, T-Mobile committed to investing $40 billion in our network over the first 3 years after the merger, and I can tell you that investment is taking place here in Kansas and across the country. This is evidenced by the fact that our 5G network now covers 310 million people, and our fastest version of the 5G covered, called ultra capacity, is covering 210 million people in the nation. So every week, our network engineering team is out there. Over 1,000 sites every week are being upgraded from 4G to 5G, or new sites are being deployed. The combination of our high-band millimeter wave spectrum and our ultra capacity spectrum, which is a mid-band, and their extended low-band range gives us this opportunity to have a pretty wide spectrum range to provide our 5G coverage across the nation. So we're really excited about how that's developing after the merger. And speaking of 5G, and I'm sure you've heard the news regarding the concerns of 5G interference with aviation and FAA and the airlines and all that. Just kind of wanted to give you a quick update on that. So what is the issue? The issue is, like other generations of Gs, like I say, 5G can work in many spectrum frequencies. And to fuel 5G's growth in the U.S., the federal government released new mid-band spectrum for mobile operators to deploy 5G. Last year, the FCC completed a record-breaking auction for the spectrum in question today, commonly known as C-band. And the aviation community has raised concerns that the use of C-band could interfere with aircraft and radar altimeters of airlines. So, and that this does not affect our network at this time. And why is that? It's because the 5G network that Mitch talked about, the C-band, our 5G network operates in a 600 megahertz, which is the MH2. Don't ask me to get too more technical than that, but that's megahertz, and then 2.5 gigahertz is our network range. So the C-band's in a different range, and we do own C-band spectrum, but we're not going to be deploying that until next year, 2023. So the carriers that are involved in that now, that are rolling out they invested a lot of money in that band, and they're going to deploy it and being careful around airlines. But I just wanted to point out that, or airports, that we too have that same spectrum, but not deploying it until next year. So people on our network are obviously free to use their 5G phones as much as they want to and they can. So, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you in the committee and in the legislature, the Kansas House and the full legislature, and be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Any questions? Representative O'Hobbesome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. I just want to go back to what you indicated with respect to the FAA and also 5G. With respect to communications between the airport and aircraft, how does this affect, airports that are in rural counties that haven't yet upgraded yet, per se, particularly, say, for instance, out west, Garden City, Dodge City, or even up north, Salina, or even airfields, per se. How is that going to, if they're not going to run on your networks, is there going to be any interference with some of these smaller airports, per se? That's my question.
Good to see you, Representative. Thanks for the question. Yeah, it's a great question because, like I say, our 5G network, which is out there, and we're really focusing on rural parts, you can get our 5G network probably in a lot of those small towns. Like I mentioned, we opened a store in Garden City. So our 5G network isn't going to have that interference. And I think what I've heard from the other carriers, and maybe you could ask some of them if they're going to testify, I believe today, they're not going to roll out that C-band in certain areas to create that the conflict with the airlines. And so you're probably right. It's more the, Chicago, Detroit, those type of, or New York City, the bigger cities that are probably more potentially impact that network interference. But I think from our perspective, and again, we hope this is all worked out by the time we do roll out our C-band in the city of Kansas, so it wouldn't have that interference. So
my question is, will smaller airports will have to upgrade their technology, per se? And I'm talking about smaller airports like in rural Kansas or airfields. Say for instance, if there's an emergency, whereby if there's with respect to the rollout.
I don't know that it's their technology per se. I mean, it's the airlines or the aircraft that have that altimeter on there that could potentially be impacted when I think it's like low visibility, and they really rely on that radar, that altimeter tells them how far up they are and so forth. But so I don't know that it's because of the band, the C-band. I don't know that it's going to necessarily mean that the airports have to do something. It's more like making sure the carriers don't roll out something that interferes with the airline equipment. So, I mean, I don't know if it's the airport per se, more the airline and the aircraft themselves that would be impacted. So I don't know if I'm doing a good job answering your question, but.
I'm just trying to understand the 5G rollout and all of that, but you're fine. You're
okay.
Fine.
Thank you.
Representative Esau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Patrick. Good to see you here, not just on the streets. I was all prepared with questions to grill you, and you answered, I think, every single one of them. So good job.
Thank you.
I am one of those people that still has a landline at home. Unfortunately, it's voice over IP, so we have to keep the battery back up. But it's because I don't always have good cell service in my house. And as you know, I can go in places in my district and drop calls and not have cell service and not have mobile access to things. In addition to that, in today's world, without a phone and without a computer, applying for a job, doing all of those things that somebody who may be on a really limited budget, it's very difficult unless they can get to the library or something. So I was really glad to see that T-Mobile is looking into that and working on things that can help folks that are in those situations. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Representative. It's great to see you again in person here in the building. And yeah, I think it's definitely the pandemic as we've touched on, Kat mentioned as well, that just the demand for data usage, whether it's an employee or students, is huge. So I think that the carriers are doing what we can to really emphasize that and build out our networks as soon as we can, and especially and for us, again, rural is a big focus. And I like you, kind of, I know that neighborhood you're talking about where you go down to those little spots and sometimes you don't get the coverage you want. So I think that's one thing that we're looking to do is really just, get as much ubiquitous coverage as we can. And that's where I think it goes back to the $40 billion investment. I mean, there's no question Sprint had gobs of spectrum, which is what attracted T-Mobile to merge with us, and that gives us this ability to really roll that out across the country and hopefully get rid of those blind spots and dropped calls and so forth. So thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
We have our ranking member, Representative Keither, with a question from WebEx.
Actually, it is Representative Neighbor, because we are sharing her WebEx together. And so if you don't mind, Patrick, it's nice to have you today.
Thank you.
When you talk about the 5C band, the C-band 5G, my husband's a retired airline captain. And one of the things they've come out with in air and space technology is the controversy over the 5G. Now, since you're not doing it for another year, are you looking into any of the issues that are being questioned right now? I also know that this affects cargo planes, people planes, and it seems like they may be more Boeing than the A320, which the French have built, but Europe has not tested this either. Even though they say it's been rolled out, it has not been tested. And I gave an article to our esteemed chairman today, in case he wanted to share it with you, but this is a large concern issue, because if somebody is on, bad weather and by instrument only, it can affect the instruments to know the distance between where the landing is and throw them off, which is, to me, a safety issue. So could you address that a little bit? I know it's a lot.
Well, thank you, Representative. Thanks for the question. Good to see you. Yeah, like I said, I think, the issue is being addressed. I think when they first, it was like the 19th, I think just last week, when AT&T and Verizon were going to roll out that C-band network, but they pulled it back in some of those, in the areas where the, near the airports and so forth. So, I mean, my understanding from what I've talked to our network team is that the reason that we feel confident that by 2023, when we roll out our C-band, is that it'll be, these issues will be resolved, is because I've heard, and what they tell me, it's already in use in other places in the world with no impact on air travel. So C-band is out there in parts of the European, areas, countries that it's being rolled out there. So I'm confident that we will be able to address this here as an industry and not have issues going forward.
Yeah, and as I addressed, part of that may be because they're French-built airplanes and not Boeing. So they're starting to see some of that, the problems with technology there in Boeing airplanes, and maybe something that would have to be redrafted or looked at seriously. So thank you very much for your input.
Thank you, Representative.
Last question, Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you, by chance, know how long or when the aircraft or the FAA started using the C-band for the altimeter readings? Has that been a long time?
Well, the auction was like a couple of years ago, so that I've heard some criticism. That's, but the FAA and administration hadn't really addressed this over the last year or so when we knew the rollout of the network was going to come. So I think that's about all. I don't know any more than that of what's going on beyond the FAA and administration working with the airlines and the carriers to try to again ease back from that rollout in the airport, right in that proximity to the airport, to not have the interference. But it sounds to me like it could have been worked on a little bit before before the announced rollout of 5G by the carriers.
Right. What I was curious about, because the frequencies you mentioned, the 600 megahertz, that was used by UHF television for years, which is 470 to 700 megahertz range. You put a 1 megawatt tower up, it's a whole lot more powerful than a cell antenna. But I'm also looking, and this is a whole different subject, where you named yours off, it does get into subharmonics. It will get into those spectrums, but that's an offline discussion.
You've got some good background, and I know your background, so you come well prepared to ask that question. So, thank you.
And I want to thank you and give you a little personal plug for T-Mobile. My neighbor, we live in a rural area that doesn't have great internet availability. They got one of your T-Mobile home hotspots. Good news is they're getting like 15 times faster speeds. Better news is they use weak passwords, so am I.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the plug.
you,
I
Pat.
appreciate it. All
Appreciate it.
right, thank you all.
Next up, Molly Coker-Boyle with AT&T Kansas.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just put it right there. So appreciate everyone's patience with me while I adjust to living life with a broken leg. I don't recommend starting your January with a slip on some ice and stairs, but you know, things can only go up from here. So hello and welcome. Thank you for the welcome to testify before you. My name is Molly Coker-Boyle. I am the president of AT&T Kansas, and I want to start off by thanking you for being here today and for those of you online. For the past 140 years, we have been in Kansas. Our goal has been to create connection with each other, with communities, and with what people and businesses need to thrive every day. Now, more than ever, connectivity and connections are more integrated into everyday life than they've ever been before. So our investment in Kansas is vast. In just 3 years alone, from 2018 to 2020, we invested more than $550 million in our networks in the state, both wired and wireless. Those investments are powering upgrades from wireless connectivity, wired and wireless capacity, more than 225 network upgrades we made in just last year alone. And in fact, as of July 2021, we have now more than 1.2 million fiber miles in the state. That's enough to go around the world 49 times. So we've got lots of fiber in the state, we've got lots of towers in the state, but we're not stopping there. We have a goal to connect more than 30 million customer locations by the end of 2025. And just yesterday, we announced that we were launching symmetrical speeds of 2 gig and 5 gig service for our fiber footprint. So that means customers in Wichita, Topeka, and Kansas City will now have access to that. And as Catherine mentioned, symmetrical speeds are now the name of the game in terms of the needs for consumers. These investments are important because we've seen how much the desire for data and bandwidth continues to increase. A recent study found that the average consumer has 13 connected devices in their home. And if you have teenagers, you can probably double that, maybe triple it, but that number is only going to go up. So, and additionally, you know, we've seen with the pandemic that now more than ever, folks have the opportunity to telecommute from home for long term. So that means Zoom calls, as painful as they are here to stay. So lots of hours of video conferencing, which requires both the download speeds and the upload speeds. Now, like everyone else, we've seen, you know, firsthand the impact that data traffic has had on our network. Just from 2007, we've seen it increase more than 730,000%. So it's a lot, which is why we're making those investments in our network. You may see in the presentation, I showed a comparison of our network and that's slide 3, I believe, from 2010 to 2021, where in 2010 it was all about 2G and 3G service, and now the name of the game is 4G and 5G, as Patrick covered. And just for reference, because I know, Chairman, you asked for explanations, 1G was all about making phone calls. It was the first generation of technology. 2G, we were sending text messages, maybe some pictures if we're feeling creative. 3G was all about using the internet on your phone. 4G was all about streaming, watching Netflix, HBO Max, you know, FaceTimes with friends. And now 5G is about smarter everything, smartphones, smart machinery, smart factories. It's going to allow so many more devices to connect to the internet at once, and it's also going to allow for faster speeds and lower latency, which is kind of think about a buffering wheel, the time it takes for something to load. That speed gets so much quicker, which is really important if you're looking at things like autonomous vehicles or using telemedicine, so that way the signal remains uninterrupted. So, as I shared, the demand for data is only going up. And we're seeing it from all kinds of sectors, whether it's factories, farms, public safety, healthcare. Before I move on, I want to talk a little bit about public safety in particular, because it's something I'm especially proud of. Following the tragedy of 9/11, the September 11th Commission made a study, and one of the recommendations that came out of that study was it needed a dedicated network for first responders. Because as they found during that tragedy, fire couldn't talk to police, New Jersey couldn't talk to New York. It was very challenging in order to respond to that disaster. And so it was decided that that was going to be a commitment that the US was going to make, was to build a network for first responders. So in 2012, Congress created a federal oversight body called the Firstnet Authority, who is overseeing a public-private partnership to build a network for first responders. After a competitive, robust RFP process, they ultimately selected AT&T as their public-private partner for this network. So the FirstNet network is built for and informed by the needs of public safety. So, and as part of that commitment to public safety, we turned up towers across rural and remote parts of our state to make sure that whether you're in Barber or Brown, Logan or Sherman, that there is network capacity there. We also recognize, though, that there are some places where, as folks have mentioned, coverage is challenging, whether it's a topography issue, a signal strength issue, or a tower issue. So we also have available for first responders 80 deployables. So cells on wheels, cells which are known as cows, cells on light trucks, which are called colts. We even have flying cows, which are cell sites on drones. So these can be deployed at no charge to first responders. So that way, whether it's a wildfire in southwestern Kansas or an ice storm in the Northeast that may take out network facilities, those assets are there to help first responders do what they need to do. We've also made investments to support tribal first responders and have put up new towers around the tribal nation areas. And these deployables and support can be used both for planned events like marathons, like Garmin had in Olathe, to Super Bowl parades. Hopefully we'll have another use to use that in the near future. They can also be used, as I said, for emergency situations, whether man-made or natural. So search and rescue missions, ice storms, wildfires, tornadoes, et cetera. So now that we've covered some of the investments we've made today, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about where we've been. So in your packet, you should have a map provided by the Kansas Corporation Commission that shows the footprint of the telephone exchange areas. That light blue shade is, and if you can make it out, number 35 is AT&T's footprint. So much of the investment that we're making in our fiber network still follows those service areas of before. So as I shared, we have been doing business in the state for more than 100 years. First, we started with an all-copper network for telephone service, and then gradually over time, we've moved into bringing fiber into our central offices, into the neighborhoods, and now into the home. So this leads us to our present day, where we are continuing to build out, as I said, and we're excited about bringing fiber across our footprint. So whether it's fiber or wireless, our commitment to Kansas remains unchanged. Our goal is to create connection and to help people get online when and where they need it. But we realize that we're not there yet. The pandemic made that very clear, and I think it's an issue for those of us who've been living and working in this space that we've been aware of for many years. We believe that every American should be connected to the internet, and we're trying to do our part to make it happen. Whether it's through participating in the Federal Communications Commission's emergency broadband program, and now the American Connectivity Program to help with affordability issues, whether it's offering a low-income program to our own consumers called AT&T Access, whether it's helping with digital literacy, helping people understand how to get online and be online safely and protect their information. We are committed to doing our part with, as a public-private partner, to help make those challenges of accessibility, affordability, and digital literacy be a thing of the past. In Kansas, some of that effort looks like working with entities like Flagship Tech and, and the Public Library Association and Goodwill Industries of Kansas to help support their local efforts. So building a mobile skills lab for digital literacy courses, helping youth go through a technology camp so they can understand how to be online safely and securely and understand what that looks like. Finally, our commitment to the state goes beyond just technology. We are committed to giving back. It is a place where we live, work, and serve. And so our employees are giving time, more than 8,000 hours of volunteer service. We're giving money to support first responders. In the heat of the COVID response, we were working with Operation Barbecue to make sure our first responders and healthcare workers had food to keep them sustained. And we're proud to support entities like the Wichita Police Foundation and their random acts of kindness to make sure that when those community police officers encounter someone in need, whether it's a refrigerator, a bed, that they have some resources that they can use to help impact their community positively. So I know I spent a lot of time trying to cover a lot of topics. We're a big company, we do a lot, but we're also a Kansas company, and we've been a Kansas company for more than 140 years and look forward to the next 140. So with that, I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Molly. Questions for AT&T? Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your kind of walking through 1G, 2G, 3G. So what's the view in terms of how long 5G will suffice?
So we're already talking about 6G, and that's the thing, the moment that you're deploying a network, and it can take, for every generation of technology, you're replacing antennas on all of your networks. So basically, we've been through 5 iterations of a network build for wireless and are already preparing for, 6 and what comes after. So I don't know how quickly it will be deployed. About every 10 years, you see a new G of technology, so you can kind of think about that. But yeah, we're in the thick of trying to get that 5G out there.
Could I have a follow-up? Different question, but I didn't hear you cover, how do you set prices for Kansas customers? I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so we are not regulated on terms of prices, so it's what the market will bear, and I will tell you that a lot of it is based on competition. This is we are not guaranteed service, we are not guaranteed customers, so we have to fight for that business and make it competitive. So whether it's an entity like my friends back there with the Cable Association, or whether it is Google or another broadband provider, we are out there, looking to get your business. And I will say I am proud that as of yesterday's announcement, we're also trying to simplify pricing. We know that if you look at a bill, you see lots of taxes and fees, and some of those we can control, some of those we can't because of federal or state statute. But our goal is to try to at least simplify all the add-ons for consumers.
Representative Carmichael via WebEx.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a long list, but I'll try to march right through it very quickly. First, Ms. Coker-Boyle, I'm an AT&T customer. I have AT&T fiber. I want you to know that it is the most reliable, the fastest, the most resilient internet service that I've ever had. Because of that competitive marketplace and the way promotional plans work, I may have to return soon to my friends, the local coaxial network provider. But I really appreciate how well AT&T fiber has worked. I also greatly appreciate the governmental relations people at AT&T, both your in-house and your contractors. There is no doubt but what I can get a hold of people at AT&T any hour of the day or night and get the right answer, the straight answer, and I really appreciate that. In my district, Evergy is now expanding or upgrading, transmission lines. It's going to be several miles of line through a historic neighborhood that is actually an urban forest. But I want you to know that AT&T was the first company to step up and say, absolutely, we will coordinate with Evergy and the other telecom carriers to try to lessen the number of poles, to try to co-locate and trench if and when possible. And that makes a really big difference to an urban community like mine, because we hear a lot about the need to expand the internet into rural areas. But when we expand utility services in an urban environment, we can make it a good thing for the community, or we can literally destroy a community depending on how we do that. And I appreciate what AT&T has done. The final thing, Mr. Chairman, with your leave, is I'm on the State 911 Council, and as you may know, Ms. Coker-Boyle, we have had difficulties with the reliability of the State 911 system, and sadly, in all three of the instances of major outages on that system, particularly the three outages that affected my town, human error on the part of AT&T employees has been heavily implicated. So my question to you is, what steps, and I know you are taking steps, but what steps is AT&T taking to maintain and improve the reliability of our state 911 system?
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative Carmichael, first for your remarks. And I should have started out by saying we are, I can't say enough about our team, whether it's, again, our in-house folks, Michael Ruffin and Lane Ridinger, or our external lobbyists, Paul, George, John, Riley. We are so lucky and privileged to work with them. So with that, I will answer your question in terms of 911 service. Again, as the vendor of the state's 911 system, we are proud to work with the 911 Council on all of these issues. I will say that thankfully, each of those instances has not been repeated. So like anyone else, we learn from our mistakes and we put processes in place to try to avoid making sure that those repeated. In different instances, it has been a software issue. In other instances, it's been a hardware issue. But with each of those, as Representative Carmichael could attest to, our goal is to not only look at the issue, figure out what happened, figure out how we can put systems and processes in place to avoid that future human error in the process. And I will say I'm so proud of the partnership with that council. They've been great to work with, and I think Kansas should be really proud of the investments it's made in its 911 system. It is one of the best in the country, if not the best, because of the investments that have been made in adopting next generation technology. So it is reliable and redundant as able. Now, we don't have a duplicative fiber path to every 911 PSAP. That, again, is an investment that the state has to decide if it wants to make out of 911 funds. But we have done the most that we can with the investments that are available to make sure that that system is strong and resourceful. And we appreciate the partnership with the state and with the local PSAPs.
Yeah, I hope people understand that we do not have a fully redundant system insofar as hardware is concerned. That's not AT&T's fault. That's a policy decision by the council about where the 911 fees are spent. Thank you, Ms. Coker-Boyle, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions for this conferee? Seeing none, I'll just point out I got a text from Mark Skoglund. You're not able to offer Representative Carmichael any discount on his monthly bill for that endorsement. So
We did not pay him to say anything. Just here to serve. So thank you all so much.
next up, we have John Federico, President of the Kansas Cable and Telecommunications Association. John, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am John Federico with Federico Durst Consulting and president of the KCTA, the Kansas Cable Telecommunications Association. I've submitted written testimony, but I'm going to stray a bit and try to offer this gibberish on some points that I think are worth mentioning. I'll start with the sincere appreciation, Mr. Chairman, of the bouquet of flowers you sent on behalf of the committee. Number 1 on your conferee list. I'm sorry, number 4 on your conferee list and number 1 in your heart. It meant the world to me and our staff. You'll see part of our lobbying team, of course, the Federico Durst team, but also Dan Murray and Julie Hine have been working with the association for many years. We also have in the audience today Tom Cruson from Comcast, Comcast being the biggest cable provider in the country. And we have Megan Bottenberg, who is quite familiar to all of you on behalf of Cox Communication, who is the largest provider in Kansas with a fairly significant footprint serving 90 different communities from one edge of the state to the other. I want to make 4 quick points that I think are, like I said, worth mentioning. I've said this on most times that I have presented, in that this is a very, very competitive market, the world of telecommunications. And this industry is best served with a light regulatory touch. And as well-intentioned as sometimes some legislative activity or proposals are, we have to make sure that it's a balance and it's not favoring one technology over another, one provider over another. And I think the basis of those sentiments are you want us as an industry to continue to invest in the infrastructure. I think you heard from one of the conferees today that at a time where this entire network was highly stressed at the beginning of COVID, because of that investment in our plant, our infrastructure, we were delivering. We're pretty proud, and I think the entire industry can take some pride in the fact that at its heaviest usage, you were able to educate from home, work from home, game from home, whether it be video, wireless, or what have you. So the ability to create a regulatory atmosphere that encourages investment, I think, is incredibly important for the entire telecom industry. Going back to subsidies, and I don't mean any one particular subsidy, but there is, I think you can appreciate, an avalanche of money that is coming into this industry for broadband expansion. And this is an incredibly wonderful and maybe long overdue thing. Part of it is an allocation from the state. Most of it is coming from the feds. What's important in that process, and I think the Department of Commerce is doing a good job in setting up a fair and very deliberate process by which they can award grants to put this money where it's most needed. I think it's important, two things. One, we continue to focus on the unserved areas of the state as our highest priority, the greatest need to get broadband to those communities, which otherwise would be too expensive to launch that product in that area. And I will remind you that those aren't exclusive to rural areas. For those that represent relatively urban areas, oftentimes there's neighborhoods or rings around the city or town where it's still expensive. So focusing on the unserved or underserved areas are very important. The other that we think is critically important in this process is having some type of challenge process. We talk about, in the past, the importance of having a map. Before we start awarding money to provide broadband in that community, it'd be helpful to know where it is and where it ain't. The problem with mapping is it's very challenging to get an accurate map that we can rely on to award grants and what have you, and it's quickly outdated. By making sure that in this process there is a challenge process before a grant is awarded, a competitor would have the opportunity to look at that and say, yeah, we're already there providing those services at these speeds, so we would challenge that a grant is necessary there. It's a complicated thing, and I don't want to go too deep beyond that. The other is we focus a lot on expansion, which is fantastic. Again, getting it where it ain't. The other part of that, though, is broadband, high-speed internet is available in a lot of areas, but people aren't using it. People aren't subscribing to it. And so as you look at where to put this money and how much should go towards expansion, we might ask you to always consider adoption also. Why is it that it's available but they're not taking it? It seems illogical in today's world, but there's valid reasons. Part of it is intimidation, part of it is cost. So I just ask you to look at the adoption side of awarding grants out there. Lastly, this goes to the process and the grant money that's going into these communities to the providers. We're just starting to talk about, and by the way, this would include the cable industry as well, who is a participant in applying for some of this grant money so that they can expand into some of these areas. But what we fear as an industry, and I don't think I'm alone, is in order to win that grant, perhaps there have been overpromising and the potential for under-delivering. So I wondered if as policymakers, you might consider some type of audit where, in fact, the process of what was promised and the money awarded, they are doing just that. They're living up to their promise. I don't know what that would look like. I don't know if they're equipped at the Department of Commerce with their broadband folks, whether they have the staff to do it. But some report back to the legislature might be in order. Where are we? How much money went? Where'd it go? We're happy to work with you on that. Again, it would include the projects of which cable had bid on it and won to make sure that there's some accountability. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, John. Questions? Representative O'Hobbison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that last point you made, is it for grants that were state grants or is it federal grants that you're talking about for the audit?
Both.
Or both of them? Oh, okay. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was interested in your comment about, excuse me, adoption rates. So what's the typical model there? I mean, do you, before they extend into a particular area, do they typically go out and get people signed up to know that there's actually adoption waiting for the investment that's going to be laid in the ground to get there?
Some of the specific numbers would be proprietary, but as far as the process by which I, with the chairman's permission, am happy to turn it towards either Mr. Krusen or Ms. Bottenberg to answer that question on what their process is before they invest.
Good morning, Megan Bottenberg with Cox Communications, Director of Government Affairs. Great to see you again. So our current process is we do not seek out surveys or polls to determine, whether somebody or customer would sign up before we go into an area. We base it off of interests that we've received, and we keep track of interests that we've received. But when we talk about adoption, we also talk about what are the reasons as to why people do not enroll in a plan. What we noticed during the pandemic, especially during the height of pandemic, Cox was one of many companies that offered internet for free to low-income families. We worked providing one of our low-cost internet programs for families with students in K through 12. For several of the first few months, we offered it for free, literally. We did not see a huge increase. And so what we learned from that is there have to be other ways to get people enrolled in internet. So we changed our method of delivery of these low-cost internet programs. We started working directly with the school districts for the 2020 and 2021 school year. We worked directly with the school districts to help get their students enrolled in the Connect to Compete program, the low-cost internet program. For instance, one school district, which was here in Topeka, they enrolled all of their low-income students who receive free or reduced lunches into our Connect to Compete program. 70% of those students were enrolled with Cox, so the family's name is on the account, but the $10 a month was paid by the school district. And the school district received additional funds through the state, through the CARES Act, to do that. So again, you're looking for new ways to make sure people adopt internet, and that's what we continue to do, looking and working with cities and counties to say, how can we help your citizens get internet? Again, we worked with, I think, 15 other school districts on that same thing. I've talked to other cities, and they're looking at new ways to do that. For instance, one city has hired a digital navigator to help low-income families or senior citizens enroll in an internet plan, make sure they have a device, and make sure they know how to work the device. So again, new ways, innovation, working, and we've been working with them to do that.
Ask one quick follow-up.
Gotta be
You
quick.
mentioned intimidation. What does that mean in terms of, you said there was two reasons, possible reasons that the people aren't taking it, and one of them was cost, obviously, and the other one intimidation. I'm just curious.
Simply just not knowing how to enroll into a plan or what plan to get. They're in talking with many families throughout this whole process. And for instance, this one city really dived deep into this whole issue over the past 2 years and found that some families just don't know the process.
Representative Carmichael, final question for this conferee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to make sure that I've expressed appreciation to Cox as well. I'm one of your customers here in Topeka. The customer service is outstanding. We've gone in my town from having 22 channels over Cox in 1979 to now having hundreds of channels. I really appreciate it. On the expansion of Evergy's service in Wichita, who I heard from AT&T first, I ended up talking to a regional senior vice president in Phoenix the very same day that I first made a call about that expansion project and co-locating their lines. So I really appreciate the outreach and the help that you give members of the legislature. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I'm interested in what Mr. Federico had to say about challenges and/or auditing. I know that other players in the marketplace may think about that differently, but my door's open, and I certainly would like to hear more about those proposals. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Not much of a question there, John, but any quick response?
Wouldn't you agree? Thank
And clearly he would because he said it. Anything else?
I'm afraid you cut him off where he was about to compliment our team of lobbyists, but apparently we know where we stand now with Representative Carmichael. And for God's sakes, why don't you
Ms.
get,
Bottenberg was on vacation and she deserved one.
and perhaps you can get with the chairman to find out how to steal your neighbor's service instead of paying for all these subscriptions.
They don't have cable in my area. We had to get creative.
With all sincerity, we do appreciate this time. We think it's important, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. All right. If we have time at the end, we'll come back for any follow-up questions that any committee member may have. John Idu is next, Director of Government Affairs for Lumen Technologies, formerly Centurylink.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's just wonderful to be here. It's the first time I've been back testifying in this State House in 2 years, so it's just great to be without a mask, although Representative Depperdink probably wants me to have a mask on. It's nice to go last because I can correct everything you just heard. No. As I sat here and listened, most of our policy positions are in lockstep, so that's always a good position to be. My name is John Idu with Lumen Technologies. We are formerly known as Centurylink. We have been in Kansas since 1909, not quite 140 years like AT&T, but almost. I've been here quite a few of those. But Lumen is a landline wired phone company. We have both a national network, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and we also have a local network, which has been here the longest. It used to be United Telecom. It then transitioned to Sprint. We've changed our names to Embark, Centurylink, and I'll tell you about our future plans with our local network here. But on our national network, we operate in over 60 countries, 450,000 route miles. The back of my testimony has quite a few pictures, and that does highlight our national network. We are very big in the cybersecurity space. One of the recent press releases that we have out of our Black Lotus Labs affiliate, which is a cybersecurity specialty firm, they discovered a months-long cyber attack on Russia's foreign ministry by North Korea. I just found that interesting that They were the ones that discovered it. And you're thinking, well, why are we so deep into cybersecurity? It has been reported that 2/3 of all internet traffic in the world touched the Lumen network at some point. So we take cybersecurity very seriously. We invest hundreds of millions of dollars in cybersecurity every single year. We not only need to protect our network, but we need to protect our customers' network. And of course, we do sell cybersecurity products. A couple of other things about Lumen on the national network. Last week, we announced a $1.2 billion contract with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So throughout Kansas and throughout all the other rural areas, we will be wiring them up onto our national network. And in December, we announced a significant contract with the U.S. Army Reserve Network. Moving to the local network, we provide local phone service and broadband connections to 119 communities. We do have some larger areas such as Junction City, Gardner, Spring Hill, but of our 119 exchanges, 111 of those have less than 1,000 access lines. So we are very rural as well. Moving on to some of the newer news on the local side. Late last year, Lumen announced that we will be selling 20 of our local states, including Kansas, to Apollo funds. And if you look in the back of my testimony, you'll see the picture of which states will stay with Lumen and which states will stay or will go with Apollo. Now, once that transaction closes in the second half of this year, that doesn't mean Lumen's going to be leaving Kansas. We still have a significant presence with our national network. We have significant operations in Wichita, Topeka, Kansas City. Matter of fact, one of our big success stories with the Wichita area happened right as the early days of the pandemic, when the Wichita Public Schools called us and needed more capacity. They were going to have to go to a learn from home scenario over the weekend, and we were able to very quickly turn around and augment their capacity to meet their needs pretty much overnight. So we do have a significant investment in Kansas, even after the Apollo transaction. At this point, given the time, Mr. Chairman, I think I will stop. I think most of you all are very well aware of Centurylink and what we've done to the state, so I will just kind of open it up for questions.
Questions from Mr. Idu. Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Interesting looking at the maps. Just a high-level question. Long-term, what does this mean for you? Because I enjoy working with you. You're a good contact here, and I'm hoping Kansas shows up orange on the backside, it doesn't mean you eventually go away.
Yes, those decisions have not yet been announced or made. It'll be closer to the close of the transaction before some of those personnel decisions are made.
Please keep us in the loop, though.
All right, thank you, sir.
Other questions for John? Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Next up, we have Eli Venendahl, the Director of State and Local Government Affairs from Verizon, and he'll be appearing via WebEx. Eli, on.
Let me do a mic check real quick, Chairman. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah. We got you. There you are.
Perfect. Well, thank you, and thank you, Chairman and Committee, for letting me present today. My name is Eli Venendahl. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Verizon in Kansas. We are represented by Dina Fisk as our local lobbyist, who I know many of you know. I hope at some point to be able to be there in person, and I appreciate the opportunity to present virtually today. Just as some background on Verizon Communications, we were created on June 30th, 2000. So we're only about 20 years old as a full Verizon company. We're one of the world's leading technology communication service providers. We've launched commercial 5G mobility, fixed wireless, mobile edge computing. We're the first companies in the world to do that. And we continue to focus on growing and expanding our business. One of our mottos at Verizon is we create the networks that move the world forward. It's about connecting people It's about connecting communities and bringing us closer together, which I think we would all say has been, a critical part of our lives always, but probably brought to the forefront during the pandemic. As I go through it, and I know you all have my testimony, I think there's three things that I hope you'd remember from the presentation today as it relates to Verizon. The first is reliability, the second is evolution, and the third is impact. So at Verizon, our customers come first, and we know that one of those key needs of customers is reliability. We've kind of heard it during this session that we will all need to stay connected, and it's something that's difficult to do sometimes with broadband. So at Verizon, we know our customers rely on our network, and we've really gone and met this challenge. So we continue to be one of the most awarded networks out there. To illustrate, in 2021, we were awarded Best Overall Network Performance and Reliability for the 16th year in a row by Root Metrics. Additionally, we were ranked #1 in accessibility, call, text, and other award categories. And this includes receiving the best overall performance in Wichita and tying in Kansas City, where Root Metrics did its review. You hear it on advertisements and other things. Reliability is key to us, and I think that's one thing that our customers have always found with Verizon is that reliability. In addition to reliability, evolution is the next point I just like to bring up. Verizon is continually evolving its network. As mentioned before, we on from 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and now we're moving forward. But the most recent evolution for us was the announcement of Verizon's 5G ultra wideband network, which was launched last week. This is going to give 100 million people, including people in many of the areas of Kansas, the opportunity to have faster connections. What it's going to do is connect people with broadband speeds in a lot of cases on their mobile devices. These could be download speeds up to 1 gigabit and capacity to support really heavy actions for multiple devices at one time. So, there's a variety of things we're always doing. This includes downloading huge documents. We're streaming movies and other things I think we like to do in our free time, but video conferencing, FaceTime, ultra wideband is going to help make that not only reliable but faster and really move that forward. Along with that evolution and reliability, one of the key things that we focused on throughout the country, but in Kansas as well, is our first responders. So Verizon, as America's most reliable network, has really made it a priority for our first responders to stay connected when they need it most. I think nobody in our society do we rely on and has our trust most than our frontline workers. And so in order to support that, Verizon's launched a Verizon Frontline program. It's a comprehensive platform that combines the reliability of our award-winning network with solutions and innovations that meet the needs of public safety, including the reliability piece, which I've touched on, but real interoperability and innovation. So we've invested over $159 billion in our advanced network infrastructure to help aid these agencies and invest in our overall network and public safety. And then to kind of further support public safety, one of the key things that we've really enhanced over the last few years is our Verizon response team. So I think we've seen across the country, just horrible things that have happened that have required responses from our first responders, whether it be the pandemic, wildfires, tornadoes, hurricanes. Seems like there's always a new story out there. And so we have a 24-hour support system. It's the largest dedicated response team out there that responds to these kind of incidents and issues, and our network provides support to them on that front and customizes to some of their needs. The final piece I'll bring up is impact. So Verizon, one of our key stakeholders is society. Right? We believe we have a duty to impact and support our communities that we live and work in, including those in Kansas, and have made efforts to really dive into that. One of the things that was put together in 2020 was Verizon's business plan for supporting society, which is known as Citizen Verizon. So Citizen Verizon is a framework that helps us leverage our resources, our technology, and our employees to drive progress in three key areas: digital inclusion, climate protection, and human prosperity. The one that I think has particularly been impactful in Kansas is our digital inclusion piece. So with a partner known as Digital Promise, we have a program called the Verizon Learning Schools, where we identify schools with low-income students who are in really need of support and help. These are identified by Digital Promise independently, and then Verizon comes in and provides the technical training support and equipment for that. One of the great announcements for Kansas in particular was at the end of last year when we announced initially 12, and now it's grown to 19 Verizon Learning Schools, or we hear them used as VIL schools, where we're not only providing devices and internet access for 4 years for the students of these schools, but also focusing on providing training and other resources to teachers and the families that are in these schools to help them have the opportunity to adopt the technology, one, but also leverage it to make sure that they are getting the education that they need to really succeed in the world. So with that, I know that there's been a lot of questions and other things, so I will we'll close but and open it to questions, but want to thank everyone for their time today.
Thank you, Mr. Veenendahl. Questions from the committee. I'm going to ask that you not monologue, but get right to your question in the interest of time. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Veenendahl, I appreciate you being here today. In your written testimony, and I think to some extent in what you've just told us, you alluded to a Verizon program known as Frontline. I'm not familiar with Frontline, but I am familiar with AT&T's FirstNet, and I'm trying to figure out, is this a similar program, or is Frontline something different than what your competitor offers to, I think, the majority of law enforcement agencies and first responders in Kansas?
So Frontline is Verizon's service that it provides to public safety, right? So it's a program that's specifically designed to respond to the needs that they have, as well as identify and support the specific technology needs they have. It has custom-based programs for them, providing them specific data plans, whether they're a public safety member or volunteer, however they fall in, and making sure that they have connected and have priority preemption and the other things that are needed. So I'd say it's Verizon's response to the FirstNet network, right? It's our dedicated efforts to public safety.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thank you for being here. In the interest of time, I'm interested in your carbon neutral and your renewable energy options that you have in your written testimony. I would like some elaboration on that. Would you be kind enough to send me some more information about what you're doing and like your 3 green bonds and where you're putting your trees and all sorts of stuff like that? So if you could do that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you, sir. Any further questions for this conferee? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a short question. I didn't see anything in your testimony about the current 3G networks, the CDMAs, or I understand sometime this year or toward the later part of the year, you're going to be shutting down the 3G and possibly some of the 4G, which would be the non-voice LTE. Can you expound on that just a little bit?
Sure. So I'm not aware of it turning out for any 4G, so I'll have to go back and check on you for that. I know that there's been some of the networks that have the 3G capabilities are being turned down, and I'll have to provide the specifics related to Kansas to you, Representative, but I'm happy to follow up with you on that.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Look forward to that follow-up information.
You bet. Thank you.
Next up, we have Jade Piros de Carvalho? Okay, look, they gave me Veenendahl, and then so
Yeah, we're trying to keep you awake this morning. It's Jade Piros de Carvalho. A lot of people just call me Jade. I feel like Cher that way, so that's fine. But thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to provide testimony about the current state of broadband in Kansas. I will briefly familiarize this committee with IdeaTech and our recent expansion efforts, and then just offer 4 policy recommendations that will ensure your investments bring economic growth, innovation, and competitiveness to Kansas. IdeaTech, if you're not familiar, is a Kansas-owned and operated internet provider with a mission to bring internet freedom to underserved homes and businesses in our state. We're based in the rural town of Wheeler, Kansas, in the south central part of the state. And we are a CLEC, which is a competitive provider of both broadband and voice services that does not receive funding from the Kansas Universal Service Fund. As such, with mostly private funding, we have built more than 4,000 miles of fiber throughout Kansas, providing broadband to thousands of customers in nearly 50 communities. In 2020, Idea Tech was competitively awarded emergency response grants from the Kansas Office of Broadband. And that funding, combined with Idea Tech's own capital, enabled us in the very restrictive time span of 4 months to fix decades-long internet accessibility issues for nearly 13,000 homes and businesses across 17 counties. We believe that this example of expedited broadband deployments really shows the power of relaxing regulations, fast-tracking application processes, and giving innovative companies like ours the opportunity to compete for grant funds to get the job done. While Kansas was ranked in the bottom 10 states in broadband coverage in 2017, today we're currently in the middle of the pack at 28th in the nation, but we know we can do better. We have the momentum, and now we need to work together to be among the most connected states in America. We can do this by focusing on the following 4 priorities. Firstly, we hope that you'll expedite broadband funding programs. We were really encouraged to see the inclusion of industry voices in the Spark Connectivity Subcommittee, and Idea Tech is thrilled to be a part of that conversation. Recommendations that come out of that committee should be swiftly channeled into the creation of broadband grant programs supported by the American Rescue Plan Act and the Infrastructure Act. Kansans without fast broadband need a solution now. Timing is also important because Kansas is competing with other states across the nation for fiber optic cable, contractors, and equipment. With this in mind, we encourage you to shore up staffing in the Office of Broadband to levels similar in other states. They're currently operating with a lot of very expensive out-of-state contractors or consultants who know nothing about Kansas. The Office of Broadband has done an extraordinary job of administering grant programs on a very shoestring staff. But while states around us have broadband offices with GIS specialists and in-house technical and engineering staff and multiple grant coordinators, Kansas is trying to pull off the massive undertaking of administering hundreds of millions of dollars in grant funding with 2 staff members and the use of expensive consultants. I do know that the governor's budget includes a token amount of funding for additional staffing in the broadband office. It may not be sufficient, but we do urge you to support that budget item to ensure programs can be rolled out quickly and efficiently and without an over-reliance on costly out-of-state consultants who have no knowledge of Kansas. Secondly, we believe in a fiber-first model, and we really encourage you to adopt fiber first for all new broadband investments by allocating the vast majority, at least 80%, of available funding to fiber and the remaining for alternative technologies. Fiber is the best investment for taxpayer dollars. It's the only scalable, future-proof technology that shows a long-term solution. It's the only technology that can keep up with bandwidth demand growth. We know that since 1983, bandwidth demand has doubled every 2 to 3 years. Fiber is the only technology that has potential to sustain our bandwidth needs for decades to come. Furthermore, fiber deployment stimulates job growth in the construction trades and stimulates the economy through durable goods purchases, transient uses like hotel rooms and restaurant meals, all which boost sales tax revenues. Billions in subsidies have been wasted by the federal government on wireless technology that keeps our underserved communities and rural areas in an endless cycle of funding and replacement every few years, all for inferior service that leaves them at a competitive disadvantage. Technology like low Earth orbit satellites have been promising a solution for years but are unproven and show the same capacity limitations as adoption increases that wireless does. It goes back to the maxim, buy cheap, buy twice, or in our case, buy 4 or 5 times. For the money that the federal government has spent on wireless, we could have wired Kansas with fiber a long time ago. But now that funding is going to be decided on at the state level. So we're very hopeful that Kansas will make the right decision to invest wisely with fiber now. If we keep waiting, we'll fall further behind. Thirdly, give up the idea of a perfect map. Yes, mapping is useful. We need to make decisions based on data. But we've talked about Kansas's digital divide for years, and we continue to hold off on programs to fix the divide in the hopes of creating the perfect map or obtaining the perfect data set. It doesn't exist. There's so many maps, and stakeholders will likely never agree on them. Waiting on a perfect map has been a big contributor of the digital divide. Kansans without broadband know where the needs are, so we should listen to them and target areas where businesses and residents tell us they need it, instead of basing grant decisions on arbitrary maps created from provider information because providers are incentivized that way to game the system. Current broadband maps are inaccurate largely because some providers have distorted them by over-reporting their coverage and speeds in order to maintain their monopolies. This allows them to shield their territories from grant eligibility, keeping out competition that is willing to invest to fix the digital divide. Either rely on actual speed test data from houses and businesses that complain about poor internet service, or better yet, adopt a fiber-first approach, because that one objective, accurate map that everybody can agree on and that already exists is a map that shows where all the fiber is and isn't in Kansas. So we have that map. I'd be happy to share it with you. And lastly, we ask that you address unreasonable public right-of-way access fees. I'm glad Eric Sartorius is no longer here because he probably crucified me for this. So we're asking that the legislature should adopt the recommendations of the 2018 Kansas Broadband Deployment Task Force, which included better access to public right-of-way, accelerating approval of construction permits, and asking local governments to charge fees that are based only on their actual costs. We can recount instances with the emergency funding that Kansas provided us during the pandemic to get people who didn't have service in localities that charged in the thousands of dollars for permitting when the intended purpose of such charges is to merely recoup the cost of administering the permits. It's not as an added revenue stream for those communities. This is an enormous hindrance to broadband deployment in those areas. And in fact, we will have to reroute designs to avoid communities that have those excessive fees. And that's to the detriment of their constituents, their residents. So in closing, I just would like to mention that advancing broadband, as we know, for all Kansans will require partnerships between providers, policymakers, agency officials, local governments, the business community, and the public. We must be careful to avoid approaching solutions with the same lens as we have in the past. We have an unparalleled opportunity this year to successfully address connectivity inequities in our state with policies that are future-focused, market-based, and innovation-incenting. IdeaTech looks forward to being a part of that solution, and we thank you for your consideration of these policy recommendations, and would be happy to answer any questions you have either now or if you'd like us to send along additional information.
Thank you. Representative O'Hobbison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony today. My question is, what is your company doing, particularly in rural Kansas, to address cybersecurity, like for the customers you guys are, for the people you're providing service to, homes and businesses? What are you guys doing in terms of investment, making sure that there's no internal or external attacks to businesses, that you provide services to? And that same question to Catherine as well, since you're in the Southwest. I mean, I know you guys are sort of more rural areas, so you can address that.
Representative, let's confine your questions to this conferee. We're running short on time.
Representative, it's really good to see you, and thank you for that question that I have absolutely no technical expertise to answer. But I do know that we have a very vast and highly qualified internal team that deals with cybersecurity, and the security of our networks is of utmost importance because we do have several school districts, hospitals, and every single connection we make that's an important element, but certainly in those areas. So I'd be happy to send along information when I get that back from our IT staff.
Other questions for this conferee? No. Representative Delperdang.
And I appreciate it. I'll keep it quick. I'm just not that familiar with IdeaTech, but
Yes.
are you guys laying your own fiber, or are you leasing IRUs, or what's the motive?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Representative. I appreciate that question. Yes, we do have an internal team, but we also contract out a great deal of that work to Kansas providers. So, for instance, when we had the emergency response grants, the projects we took on were massive, and it required the use of both our internal team for laying fiber and several contractors.
Any further questions for this conferee? We won't ask you about City of Hutch and what they charge for access. So
Thanks for going gentle on me. I don't usually testify, so thank you very much.
I had two representatives who had questions for prior conferees. First was Representative Keither and Representative Neighbor. Are you still with us on WebEx?
Yeah, I am, and I will not ask any questions right now. Thank you.
Okay. Second was Representative Esau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep mine really short. And if there's not time now, maybe just bring it up in the future. Are there any pieces of legislation that any of you are working on right now that you think that this committee should be aware of? And I know that there was one conferee, Mr. Fusic, that might have had one. I don't know if there was anyone else.
Anyone who wants to walk or crutch their way to the microphone to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. There are several pieces of legislation the industry is working on. A tax bill that is obviously going to go to tax committee. It's equipment exemption refund, and we're supportive of that. The other one is the 988 bill. This is Chairman Brenda Landwehr had the bill last year. Basically, federal legislation was passed in 2020, which allows the states to impose a fee or a local fee or a statewide fee to help support suicide prevention. So that bill is out there. We've been working with her, had a couple of meetings with her already. It looks to impose a surcharge. At this time, they're talking like 25 cents. I think it was introduced at 50 cents. So I know Representative Keither and I've had conversations about that as well, and Representative Carmichael because of the 911 relationship. So the carriers want to be able to, if the legislation passes, just be able to administer that quickly. So that, I think those are the two that I'm aware of, but happy to have anyone else take.
Anybody else want to take a stab? Anything else? Anyone on that? Okay. Ms. Moyer, would you want to address the cybersecurity question that Representative Hobson had real quick, or do you want to send us something by way of follow-up?
I think it probably follow up. I mean, I can address it, but I think it's technical and probably somewhat boring and probably somewhat too long. So we'll get with you, Representative, afterwards.
Sounds great. We do technical and boring very well here. So, all right. I want to thank all the conferees who are here today. Committee members, they are available to you offline to ask additional questions and get additional information. We will have another day on broadband specifically later this session to talk about what's going on with Spark and the ARPA funds, the Office of Broadband. So that conversation is only going to continue, and we will make sure we have a say in that as well. So thank you, everyone. With that, we are adjourned.